The shirt that changed everything, I always believed I had the perfect life. A devoted husband, a beautiful house, and a career that allowed me the freedom to balance work and love. Everything was stable, organized, almost like a picture-perfect frame pulled out of a lifestyle magazine. Until that morning. I remember it so vividly. It was a Wednesday, the kind of ordinary day you never expect to hold extraordinary pain. My husband Daniel had rushed out for a meeting. He forgot his laptop bag in the foyer, so I decided to surprise him by dropping it off at his car before I headed to my studio. That's when I saw it. Folded neatly on the back seat of his usually spotless car, there was a men's shirt. But it wasn't his. Daniel was meticulous. He only wore crisp whites and navy blues, all tailored and branded with his initials. This one. It was floral. Cheap fabric. Medium size. Too small for him. The buttons were plastic, and the scent on it? It wasn't his cologne. It was soft, almost sweet, feminine. I froze. It was such a small thing. A shirt, a piece of fabric. It shouldn't mean anything, right? But my instinct screamed otherwise. I stood there, in the driveway, heart thumping, questioning if I had just discovered something I wasn't supposed to. When Daniel came home that night, I didn't mention the shirt. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that maybe he borrowed it from someone. Maybe he spilled coffee and needed something quick to change into. I made excuses for him, because I wanted to believe the man I loved wouldn't hide anything from me. But something inside me had shifted. The next few days, I watched him more closely. His smiles felt rehearsed. His hugs a little rushed. The way he avoided eye contact when I asked about his day, it wasn't like before. And then came Friday. He left again for what he said was a conference dinner. Only this time, I followed him. I felt like a crazy woman, clutching my keys, palms sweating, my heart in my throat as I tailed my husband's car through the winding streets of our city. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stop, to turn around. But curiosity, pain, fear, all of it pushed me forward. He didn't go to any restaurant or hotel. He parked in front of an apartment complex on the other side of town, a neighborhood I had never seen before. A woman stepped out to meet him. She looked comfortable, too comfortable. She greeted him with a kiss, not a quick peck, but a familiar one. The kind you give someone you love. Someone you're used to. My world shattered. I didn't confront him that night. I just went home. Sat in the dark, playing the image of that kiss over and over in my head like a cursed video on repeat. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. If he could lie to my face every day and still kiss another woman like she was the center of his world, then I needed to know the full extent of the betrayal. I hired someone. A private investigator. Something I never thought I would do in my life. But this wasn't about jealousy anymore. This was about truth. About reclaiming my sanity in a story that had begun to slip through my fingers. What the investigator found? It wasn't just an affair. It was a second life. And what hurt the most was the name of the woman. The woman my husband had been living a secret life with was not a stranger. She was someone from my past. Someone I had buried years ago. And she had come back in the most painful way possible. His perfect lies. People think heartbreak happens in a moment. But the truth is, it drips. It comes in fragments, in whispers, in subtle signs you pretend not to notice because accepting them would mean accepting that your whole life might be a lie. After I discovered Daniel's secret kiss with the other woman, I became two versions of myself. The first was the wife he saw every day, still calm, still composed, still playing her role in our carefully constructed life. The second, a ghost with bloodshot eyes, staying up at night rereading every text, every business trip detail, every moment in the past 5 years where something had felt off. I had a front row seat to my own unraveling. And what made it worse? Daniel was perfect. So perfect it almost made me doubt myself. He still brought me flowers on Wednesdays, the same day he kissed another woman. He still texted, "Drive safe, love," while probably wrapping his arms around someone else in bed. How can someone lie with such ease? Or worse, how can someone lie with such tenderness? The private investigator I hired worked fast. Within 72 hours, I had a file on my desk that felt heavier than any heartbreak. Photos, dates, receipts, Even a child's birthday invitation with Daniel's name listed as the father. I stared at it for hours. A child. A whole life I had no idea existed. And that woman? The one from my past? Her name was Maya. Back in college, Maya and I were inseparable. Two girls who promised to never let a man come between us. Until she fell for my ex-boyfriend during our final year. I caught them together and ended everything. Our friendship, our connection, everything. I hadn't seen her in nearly a decade. I had moved on, or so I thought. And now? She was raising a child, stay with my husband. I should have screamed, confronted him right away, but I didn't. I waited. I needed to see just how far he would go with the lies. That evening, I made dinner, set the table, poured his favorite wine. Wore the red dress he once said made me look like the woman he'd fall for again and again. When Daniel walked in, he smiled like nothing had changed. "Wow," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "What's the occasion?" I smiled back. "I just missed us." His eyes softened. Me too. And just like that, we sat, ate, talked. He told me about his workload, his client dinner, how exhausted he was. Every sentence was polished with the kind of confidence only a man with nothing to hide could pull off. Except now I knew, and every word that came out of his mouth felt like poison in a glass of wine. I asked him if he was happy. He said, "Of course, babe, why wouldn't I be?" I asked him if he ever thought of children. He paused just for a second. Someday, maybe. That's when I knew. He wasn't just lying to me. He was erasing me, rewriting the story of our life while living a second one behind closed doors. That night when he fell asleep, I lay beside him, wide awake. I looked at the man I thought I knew. His breathing was steady, peaceful, like someone who felt safe in the darkness. And I was drowning in it. I pulled out my phone, opened the photos of him holding a child, of Maya smiling beside him. My hands trembled, but not from anger, from disbelief, because the man next to me, this man I loved, had crafted an illusion so perfect, even I wanted to believe it. But no more. Tomorrow I would walk into the fire, and this time I wouldn't walk out the same. The trail of deceit, there's something terrifying about knowing the truth, and still pretending you don't. Every day after I found out about Daniel's other life, I lived with the secret. Not his, mine. He thought he still had me fooled, and that was my greatest advantage. I was done crying, done doubting myself, done playing the quiet, loving wife while my soul bled under the weight of betrayal. So I followed the trail. The private investigator gave me the name of the apartment complex Daniel frequented. I drove there alone one Sunday morning, parking across the street with sunglasses and a hoodie, like some suburban version of a spy. I didn't expect what I saw. He didn't just visit that place. He lived there, at least part-time. Same car, same keys, same man, but a different world. I watched as he walked out of the building holding a toddler in his arms. A little boy with Daniel's eyes. No one could deny the resemblance. Not even him. And there she was, Maya. She opened the car door, adjusting the child's jacket, laughing at something Daniel said like it was the most natural thing in the world. They looked like a family, a happy one. It was surreal, like watching a dream I was never invited into. And worse, it was real. My real. When they drove off, I followed from a distance. They went to a park, a quiet one by the lake. The boy ran ahead of them, squealing with joy while Daniel chased after him. Maya took pictures. They looked like the kind of people I used to envy, unaware that I was supposed to be in that picture. I didn't cry. I just sat in the car, numb, breathing slowly, clutching the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from floating into madness. After they left, I got out and walked around. I found a bench and sat there, watching couples, families, children. I felt like a stranger in my own city, like I didn't belong anywhere anymore. That evening, I searched through Daniel's things at home. Laptop planner, car receipts, credit card statements. I found everything I wasn't supposed to. 2 phones, one for me, one for Maya. 2 calendars, each with different business trips and client dinners. 2 lives, carefully designed not to intersect. He even had a nickname for her in his calendar, M. Just an initial. So neat, so tidy, so deceptive. But one note caught my attention. March 15th, M's birthday. My heart sank. March 15th. That was the same day he told me he had an urgent out-of-town meeting last year. I remember it clearly because I had planned a weekend getaway for us and he canceled last minute. He had said, "I'm sorry, love. Work's killing me lately." Rain check? He wasn't working. He was baking a cake and holding her hand and celebrating with their son while I sat alone watching Netflix and eating leftover pasta. And now I had the proof. But still, I needed to know more. Why Maya? Why would she come back into my life like this? I searched her online. Socials. Nothing revealing. Just filtered images of a life she carefully curated. Ironic, since she was hiding so much behind the scenes. Then I found it. An old blog abandoned years ago. And buried deep in one of her posts was a name. Mine. She wrote about a friend she lost because of a stupid mistake. She called me the best friend I ever had. She said she missed me. And yet she stole my husband. My past, my present, and somehow my future. I felt my pulse in my throat. This wasn't just Daniel's betrayal. This was a revenge I never saw coming. A loop closing after all these years. A wound I thought had scarred over, torn open again. I knew then that this wasn't just about cheating. It was a plan, and I was caught in the middle of it. But not for long. Because now I had every piece of the puzzle, and I was ready to flip the board. The other home. The day I decided to walk into his other life, it felt like I was walking into a dream I didn't belong to. Or maybe a nightmare I was finally ready to wake up from. For weeks I had gathered evidence. I had watched Daniel lie through his teeth, hold my hand, kiss my forehead like a devoted husband, while across town he tucked another woman into bed and read bedtime stories to a little boy who called him daddy. I was tired of living like a ghost in my own marriage, so I chose a day when I knew he'd be there. It was a Thursday. He had told me he had a meeting out of town. Again. He even left a coffee on the kitchen counter with a note. "See you tomorrow night. Love you." I stared at that note for a long time. 3 simple words. Love you. They used to mean something. Now they just felt like wallpaper covering cracks in the walls. I drove across town, heart thudding, hands trembling against the steering wheel. My breath shallow. Every turn of the street brought me closer, not just to him, but to the life he built without me. And then I was there. The building looked warm. Lived in. Cozy, even. It had flower pots in the windows and chalk drawings on the sidewalk. It felt like home, just not mine. I stood outside the door to apartment 2B for 10 minutes before I knocked. 1 knock, then 2. And then I heard it. Little footsteps running. The door opened slightly, chain still on, and 2 brown eyes peeked through. "Mommy?" a small voice asked. But then another voice came, soft, sharp. "Sweetheart, that's not Mommy." The door closed and opened again. And there she was, Maya. Her hair was shorter now, darker. She wore a loose cardigan and yoga pants. No makeup. She looked older, softer, yet somehow still the same. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Shock, then panic, then shame. We stood in silence, face to face, like ghosts from a past we thought we'd buried. "I need to speak to Daniel," I said. She blinked. "He's not here." I stepped forward. "I know he's not. But this..." I gestured to the hallway, to the toys scattered behind her, to the sound of the boy's voice humming a tune in the background. "This is his home too, isn't it?" Maya looked down. "Please, not here, not like this." I took a deep breath. "Then tell me where." She hesitated, then nodded. "The park, by the lake." He goes there every Thursday at 5. Alone. To think. That detail broke me. He had a routine, a safe space, a second life, complete with reflection time. And I hadn't known a thing. That evening I went to the park. He sat on a bench near the water, tossing pebbles into the lake like some contemplative man living a double role in a romantic drama. I walked up slowly. His back was turned. He didn't see me until I was standing right behind him. When he did, he jumped, like a child caught stealing. "Clara," he said, eyes wide, voice cracking. What are you doing here?" I didn't smile. Didn't scream either. I just looked at him, deeply, clearly, like I was seeing him for the very first time. "You have another home," I said. He froze. "I saw it. I saw her. I saw the boy. I saw you, Daniel. He opened his mouth. No words came. I stepped closer. You lied to me. For how long? 3 years? 4? Clara, no, don't call my name like you know me. Because the man I married, he wouldn't do this. He wouldn't be 2 people at once. He lowered his head. Why her? I asked. He shook his head. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Huh? You tripped and fell into a second family? Silence. I stepped back. I thought I was losing my mind, Daniel. I blamed myself. I doubted my worth, but it wasn't me. He looked up. I never stopped loving you. I laughed. It was hollow, bitter. You never stopped lying either. I turned to leave. But before I did, I whispered one last thing. Next time you write a love note, don't leave it next to the shirt of the woman who isn't your wife. And then I walked away. The tears didn't come until I was in my car, but they weren't for him. They were for me. For every version of me who believed in a lie so beautifully crafted, it almost became my truth. The child I never knew, they say a child is never at fault for the sins of adults. But what happens when that child becomes the living proof of your husband's betrayal? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. Not Daniel. The boy. The child who looked so much like him. Same eyes, same dimples, even the same way he tilted his head when confused. I had only seen him for a second, through the crack of that apartment door. But that second burned into my mind like a scar that wouldn't fade. His voice echoed in my head. Mommy? He thought I was her. Maya. The same woman who once sat across dorm beds, whispering dreams about growing old together as friends. Now raising a child with the man I married. The thought made my stomach twist. But the question that haunted me wasn't, how could they? It was, why didn't he tell me? Was I not enough? Was something missing in me that made him choose her? Again? Or worse, had I become invisible in my own marriage? So forgettable that he thought I'd never notice? I needed answers. But more than that, I needed to see him. Not Daniel. The boy. So the next day I returned to the park. I sat on the same bench, watching children play. Mothers run behind them. Laughter echoing through the air like nothing in the world could ever be broken. And then I saw him. He ran ahead of Maya, holding a blue balloon, his tiny shoes making thumping sounds against the pavement. He looked so happy, so free, so innocent. And it broke me. Because despite everything, I didn't hate him. I couldn't. He was just a child. A little boy who never asked to be born into a web of lies. Maya spotted me before he did. Her eyes widened with panic. She picked up her pace, walking toward me with tension stiffening her every move. You shouldn't be here, she said. I'm not here to fight, I replied. She paused. I just want to talk. Maya looked behind her, checking to make sure the boy was out of earshot. Then she sat beside me, like we were 2 old friends again. Except this time, a wall of silence stood between us. His name is Oliver, she whispered, her voice shaking. He's 3, I nodded. He looks like him, I said. She nodded back, lips tight. I didn't mean for this to happen, she added. I looked at her. No one ever does. We sat in silence again, the weight of years between us settling like dust. I thought about telling you, she continued, when I found out I was pregnant. I even wrote you an email once, but I never sent it. Why? I asked. Because I knew what it would do to you. And because part of me was still the coward who ruined your life once. I didn't want to do it again. I stared ahead. Children ran, dogs barked. The world kept spinning. But inside me, everything was still. I loved him, you know, she said suddenly, back in college, before you even knew he existed. I turned slowly. What? Maya's eyes filled with tears. You think I stole him from you. But Clara, he was mine before he was yours. I blinked. That twist hit me harder than any slap. He and we dated before you. It didn't last. You met him a year later. And when I saw the 2 of you together, I thought maybe it was fate. That you were meant for each other. She paused, choking back guilt. But when we reconnected years later, it felt like unfinished business. My throat dried. So this was payback? No, she whispered. It was weakness. I stood up, unable to sit any longer. I don't care who met who first. What matters is he made a vow, and he broke it. With you. She didn't stop me when I walked away. But before I left the park, something pulled me back. Oliver had wandered near the swings, balloons slipping from his hand, rising slowly into the sky. He looked up, eyes filled with wonder and disappointment. Without thinking, I walked over, knelt beside him. "Don't be sad," I said gently. "Sometimes balloons come back, just in a different form." He looked at me, wide-eyed, confused, then smiled. And that smile pierced me in a way I didn't expect. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this child had nothing to do with the betrayal. But somehow, he was the only piece of Daniel that still felt pure. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. It was the reckoning before the rebirth. The woman from my past. It's strange how one person can represent so many versions of your past. Maya was once my sister in spirit, my safe place in college, my cheerleader during breakups, the keeper of my secrets. And now, she was the woman who helped bury the marriage I once believed in. I told myself I'd never speak to her again. But life doesn't always listen to our decisions. A week after our tense meeting at the park, I received a message from Maya. "Please, one last conversation. No lies, no drama, just truth." I hesitated. Every fiber of me wanted to delete it, block her, erase every trace of her existence. But the truth? I needed closure. I needed to know how my life became hers. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe, one that held no memories for either of us. When I walked in, she was already there. Nervous, fidgeting, sipping water like it could wash away years of silence and betrayal. "Clara," she said softly. I sat down. "I don't want apologies," I said quickly. She nodded. "Then I'll give you the truth." The next hour unraveled more than I was ready for. Daniel and Maya had reconnected at a mutual friend's wedding, 2 years into our marriage. A simple hello turned into casual conversations. Casual turned into emotional. Emotional turned into physical. "It wasn't planned," she said, eyes red. "I didn't mean to fall for him again. I didn't even want to, but you did." She swallowed. "He said you were distant, cold, that your careers kept you both apart. He said you hadn't touched in months." I laughed bitterly. Yes, because I was working double shifts to pay off our mortgage and his startup failures. Silence. "He said you didn't want children." That stopped me. "I couldn't have children," I said quietly. Her face fell. "Oh my God, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't, because he never told you. Just like he never told me he was sleeping with you." Tears filled her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you, Clara. But you did. I loved him." "I did too." We stared at each other. Two women who once shared dorm rooms and dreams, now sharing heartbreak and guilt. "I didn't plan this," she whispered. "No one plans to become the villain," I replied. "But we still carry the consequences." And then something shifted. I wasn't there to scream, or to cry, or to throw coffee in her face like the movies. I was there to release her, to release myself. I stood up. "For what it's worth," I said, "I hope Oliver never learns the kind of pain we created." Her lips trembled. "He won't." I walked away, but halfway out the door I turned back. "You said you loved him," I said. "Then why did he tell me? He never stopped loving me." She looked up, broken. "Because maybe he meant it." And that was the final blow. Because love shouldn't look like this. I got in my car and drove with no destination. Memories flooded in. College dorms filled with laughter. Late night talks under the stars. Promises made in whispers. And then the betrayal. How could someone go from being your everything to the person who took it all? But beneath the anger, the sorrow, the chaos was something else. Clarity. Because in that moment I realized this wasn't just Daniel's betrayal. It was mine too, for ignoring my instincts. For staying too long. For giving pieces of myself to people who never planned to keep them. But no more. Because I was done being collateral damage in someone else's love story. I was ready to write my own. A web of betrayal. When people talk about betrayal, they imagine a single stab in the back. But what no one tells you is that betrayal isn't always one cut. It's 1,000 tiny incisions, delivered slowly, deliberately by the hands you trusted most. By now, I had unraveled so many lies that I wasn't sure if I even remembered the truth anymore. Who was I before this? Before Daniel's secrets, before Maya's shadow returned, before the little boy with Daniel's dimples shattered the illusion of my picture-perfect life? I wasn't sure, but I knew I wasn't going to be the fool anymore. For weeks, Daniel pretended like nothing had changed. He still kissed me goodbye, still came home on time, still asked what I wanted for dinner, still smiled that charming smile. The same one he probably used on Maya. Only now. I smiled back, not out of love, out of calculation. I needed to know how deep this web of betrayal went. So I played along. I let him live in the comfort of his double life while I gathered every string, every knot, every lie he'd spun into our lives. One night, I waited until he fell asleep. I opened his phone. Not the one he used with me, but the second one I'd found in his gym bag 2 weeks earlier. Password? Oliver's birthday. He never even tried to hide it. The moment it unlocked, the floodgates opened. There were texts, hundreds, not just to Maya. So size your eyes. To another woman. Her name was Elise. The messages were intimate, romantic, frequent, dated back 6 months. He didn't just have a double life. He had a triangle. I stared at the phone, fingers trembling. Rage curling like fire in my chest. Who was this man I married? What kind of monster could look me in the eye, kiss my forehead, tuck me into bed, and then whisper sweet nothings to not one, but 2 other women? I kept reading. One message stood out. Let's be patient, baby. Once I sort things with Clara, we can be together. You're the one I want to build a real life with. That was it. That was the moment I broke. Because now it wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. He was planning to remove me. Quietly, strategically, and somehow make it seem like he was the one who suffered. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I took screenshots. Dozens of them. Saved them to a secret folder. Sent them to a friend in case anything happened to me. I started documenting everything. Calls, receipts, photos, conversations. Because now, it was war. The next day, I followed him again. This time, he didn't go to Maya. He went to Elise, a younger woman. Early 30s, blonde, stylish. She greeted him with a kiss that was too casual to be new. I watched them walk into a restaurant, sit at a corner table, his hand resting comfortably on hers. My fingers gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't just betrayed. I was replaced. Again, and again, and again. Each time more brutal than the last. I drove straight home, locked the door behind me, sat on the living room floor, and breathed. Long, deep, controlled. Then I got up. I pulled out the boxes. Old wedding albums, notes, letters, everything he'd ever given me. I spread them across the floor like a crime scene. Because that's what this was. A crime against love, against loyalty, against me. And I started sorting. 2 piles. Truth, lies. The photo from our honeymoon? Truth. The note he wrote while seeing Maya? Lie. The necklace he gave me on our anniversary? Lie. The moment he cried when I said I couldn't have children? Truth, maybe. I didn't know anymore. But I was starting to see clearly. This wasn't just about heartbreak. This was about reclaiming power. About owning the story before someone else wrote me out of it. And I knew what I had to do next. No more silence, no more waiting. The next time Daniel walked through that door, he wouldn't be walking into the home of a naive woman begging for answers. He'd be walking into a storm. Because I wasn't going to be the one betrayed anymore. I was going to be the one who ended the game. The confrontation I once imagined confronting Daniel with shaking hands and a broken voice. But when the time finally came, I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't scared. I wasn't weak. I was done. I had everything I needed. Screenshots, photos, receipts, his second phone, and most importantly, clarity. I knew who I was, and I knew what he had turned me into. So when he walked through the door that evening, carrying his usual box of takeout and humming like he didn't have 3 women's lives tangled around his fingers, I didn't flinch. "Hey babe," he called out. "I got your favorite, spicy chicken and..." He stopped when he saw me. I was standing in the middle of the living room. Behind me, the coffee table was covered in stacks of printed messages. Photos of him with Maya, him with Oliver, and yes, him with Elise. His smile froze. "Clara," he whispered. I didn't say a word. I just picked up the phone, the second phone, and tossed it on the table. He stared at it like it was a bomb. Then I handed him the envelope. "Open it." He didn't move. "Open it," I said louder. He flinched. Slowly, he tore it open. Out spilled the photos. Him and Maya at Oliver's third birthday party. Him holding Elise's waist in a hotel lobby. Texts, love notes, all of it. Evidence of the man he truly was. I watched his face shift. From shock to guilt to denial. And finally, fear. He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "No," I said coldly. "This time you listen." He froze. I stepped closer. "I gave you everything, Daniel. My trust, my time, my love. I bent over backwards to support your career, your failures, your dreams, while mine got smaller and smaller until I forgot what they even were." His lips trembled. "Clara, 3 women, Daniel. 3, and a child. You built lives like someone builds houses. 1 for each season, 1 for each lie." He sat down, burying his head in his hands. "I didn't mean to." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't insult me with that line." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "Not this time. You had a choice," I continued, "at every step. You chose to lie. You chose to cheat. You chose to erase me from the life I helped you build." He looked up, eyes glassy. I was scared. "Of what?" I asked. "Of love? Of loyalty? Of actually having to be a decent human being? I didn't want to hurt you, but you did." He stood, took a step toward me. "Please, just let me explain. I already know everything. Maya told me. Elise doesn't have to. Your lies can't stretch any further." Silence. The tension in the room was thick, suffocating. Finally, I whispered, "You don't get to rewrite this. You don't get to cry and play the victim in a tragedy you authored." He broke down, collapsed on the couch, hands shaking, shoulders heaving. But I didn't comfort him, because I finally realized his pain wasn't mine to carry anymore. I picked up my bag. He looked up, desperate. "Where are you going?" I paused at the door. "To reclaim my life. Clara, please." I turned one last time. "You had the power to love me, and instead you chose to lie." And over again, so now I choose something too. He blinked. "I choose myself." And with that, I walked out the door. Out of his life. Out of the ashes. Into the unknown, but finally into freedom. Choosing myself, they say the moment you walk away from what breaks you is the moment you start becoming who you're meant to be. I didn't believe it at first, because walking away from Daniel didn't feel empowering. It felt like grief. Like the death of a version of myself I had built around someone who never deserved it. The first night in my friend's guest room was the hardest. The silence screamed. My body missed the warmth beside me, even if it had long turned cold. My hands reached out in the dark, still conditioned to expect his, but there was nothing. Just me, alone. But slowly, something shifted. I started doing little things. Making coffee for one. Sleeping in the middle of the bed. Opening windows again. Something Daniel always hated because it let in noise. Sang. I let in the noise. I let in the light. And bit by bit, I let myself breathe again. I started therapy. It was terrifying at first to unpack years of compromise, neglect, and deception. But it helped. It helped me see that Daniel's choices were never about me being not enough. They were about him being less than what he pretended to be. I also started writing. Just for myself. Journals. Letters. Pages filled with pain, questions, memories. And from those pages, I found fragments of someone I had forgotten. Me. And then one day, I saw him again. Not Daniel. Oliver. It was an ordinary afternoon. I was walking through a bookstore when I heard a familiar giggle. That bright, innocent laughter that once haunted my dreams. I turned, and there he was. Holding Maya's hand, clutching a picture book, beaming from ear to ear. Maya saw me. She froze. I didn't. I walked over, calm, collected. "Hi," I said. "Hi," she replied, cautious. Oliver looked up. "It's you." I knelt. "You remember me?" He nodded. "You talked about balloons." I smiled. "That's right." Maya looked unsure. Is this okay?" I stood. "It's fine." And strangely, it was. Because this time, I didn't feel like the abandoned wife. I felt like a woman who had survived. As I turned to leave, Maya called out, "Wait!" I paused. I need to tell you something." Her voice trembled. "I didn't want to say this before. I wasn't sure. But now, you deserve to know. My heart skipped. Maya took a breath. When I told you Daniel and I reconnected at the wedding, I lied. I narrowed my eyes. We reconnected a year before that. He messaged me while you two were on your second anniversary trip. He told me he missed real connection, that he felt like he married the wrong woman. The words pierced through me, but she wasn't done. And Elise, I didn't know about her until recently. But she's not just another affair. I blinked. She's his first ex-wife from before you. I felt the air leave my lungs. What? She and Daniel were married when he was 24. Short-lived, toxic, but they never lost contact. They've been on and off for years, even during our time together. My world tilted. So he lied to all of us, I whispered. Maya nodded. We were never the only ones. A triangle? No, it was a circle. An endless loop of deception, recycled promises, and emotional manipulation. And the twist? I was never the wife in Daniel's eyes. I was just another version of love he tried to possess. The reality hit me like a wave. He never loved any of us, not truly. He only loved the power of being needed. And now no one needed him anymore. I walked away from that bookstore lighter. Because for the first time I wasn't mourning the loss of a man. I was celebrating the return of myself. And as the wind brushed through my hair, I whispered under my breath, "Burned, but reborn. Burned, but reborn." The funny thing about hitting rock bottom is, it teaches you how solid the ground beneath you really is. For months, I had felt like I was free-falling. No direction, no control, no certainty of where I'd land. But the moment I walked away from Daniel, from Maya, from the life I thought I was meant to live, something shifted. I stopped falling, and I started standing on my own 2 feet. At first, I didn't know what healing looked like. I expected some grand transformation. A sudden lightness, a moment where everything made sense. But healing wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet. It was cooking dinner for one, and enjoying the silence. It was sleeping without checking the clock, wondering when he'd come home. It was walking past the places we used to go, and not flinching. It was peace. One day I stood in front of the mirror and finally saw myself. Not the wife, not the betrayed woman, not the collateral damage in someone else's drama. Just me, Clara. And I loved her. She had been to hell and back, through lies, broken vows, and shattered illusions, but she still stood. Not untouched, but unbreakable. I started writing again. This time, not just in journals. I published my story. Under a pseudonym at first, then under my real name. Emails came, messages, comments, from women who had lived my life in different forms. They told me, "You put into words what I couldn't. Thank you for making me feel seen." And in giving voice to my pain, I gave others permission to own theirs. I found power in the truth. And then one afternoon, I received a message from Daniel. "I'm sorry, I lost everything. I hope you're okay." I stared at the words. Once they would have broken me. Now, they meant nothing. Because I hadn't lost everything. I had gained myself. And in the fire he left behind, I forged something stronger. A new life. A new love. For me. I never replied. Some stories don't need sequels. A year later, I opened a small wellness center with 2 other women. Survivors, fighters, friends. We helped others heal through journaling, storytelling, and sometimes just being heard. We named it Burn Reborn. Because that's what we were. Not ruined. Not victims. But phoenixes rising from ashes we never asked for. I still visit the park sometimes. Not to chase ghosts, but to smile at the wind, sit on the same bench, and remember the woman I used to be. And then I walk away knowing that the woman I've become is someone worth everything I lost. Some people leave scars, others leave lessons. Burn and reborn stories that break you, then rebuild you.